Welcome back to Nuance, and that was Johnny bringing us in there with the song Bright Oaks, well, at least the intro to it. We'll have the full version at the end of this podcast, so stay tuned for that. It's so weird hearing Johnny. They're a band that I grew up around, a local band, and the guitar player is my uncle, the bassist I went to high school with and worked with, and the drummer's a friend of mine. That's all there was. There was drummer and singer, so it was only 3 members. But I don't know if anyone else has this problem. But sometimes it feels like those memories being that long ago, like they're not my life or my experiences, like I can associate with them, and I feel like I know they happened, but I just don't get. I don't know. Hopefully other people deal with that issue and maybe know what I'm talking about. Maybe I'm just crazy. Both are perfectly distinct possibilities, but I don't think I'm saying anything that hasn't been attempted to be articulated by others. In this episode, this is the second half of the interview series with Adrian Elliot. And you'll see there's some volume issues on my end. I'm a little low. And I'm working this out. Give me some slack. I have no training in this. I don't know what I'm doing. But I think I have it. I have it figured out. I keep getting a little bit further in progress. No money, no education in it, so I'm doing it the dumb, hard way. Fail. And then try again. I don't know what method that is, but I guess that's the one I'm using. So in this episode, there's a couple things I still wish I would have asked Adrian at the time. And as usual, I feel like I'm still a little too aggressive. Need to ask more questions. Kind of bring it around a little bit better. A couple things just to bring up that I don't know whether it was in this first half or the second half, so blame me on that. But where Adrian points out that President Trump said something about Muslims. He was calling for a ban of all Muslims, and I said that he didn't do that. Well, I mean, I looked it up. He did say it. My defense will be that is clearly not what he meant, and it's not what he did. So I think we face that a lot, where people are using and defining words differently. It's why I try, in these discussions that I've been having, I try to get us on the same page when it comes to definitions first. But I have some episodes and interviews I haven't released, and I don't know if I'm going to, but that's the way that they kind of start off, is trying to define these terms, and then we never get past defining the terms because honestly, we're coming into discussions not even knowing how we feel about the words, not even understanding our arguments enough to know the definitions of the own words we're using within our language. So, I don't know, man. But anyway, we tried not to get hung up on these words in here, and I think some of those issues I wanted to focus on, but didn't want to get too combative with it. For an example is, there's kind of this ends justify the means, these consequential ethics that Adrian talks about, where he says to protect these people, we have to get power. But the power it's my position that you win all battles through having superior ideas. It's never through force or through power. And I get the logic that he's saying, but the people, if our idea is better and we articulate it and have evidence to back it up, then the people in power will be won over by our idea. We don't need to get power. I feel like it sets this consequential ethics idea where you can end up justifying doing whatever you want because you think you need power. And that is a very likely pathway to the suppression problem I keep talking about. Because to have power, you are oppressing someone. That is the power. The power is power over somebody. It's the only kind of real power there is. So then you are the oppressor once you have the power. Now, if you view power as influence or something like that, then yeah, I get it. But this is viewing power as taking those official seats of power, which is really having authority over other human beings. And man, I'm so uncomfortable with it. I don't know where I am. I don't know if I can articulate that fully, but it certainly doesn't feel right. I think Roberto kind of highlighted this a little bit more, is that we end up arguing about philosophies, not the actual issues that we're talking about. So it becomes very difficult to even get on the issues. So I know I often speak authoritatively. I'm authoritative on the subjects that I'm talking about. But for example, I was looking at these pictures that were showing how a photograph can look beautiful with this right lighting and all these bad settings, but for that picture can come out looking perfect, and then when you zoom back to see what was really happening, it was either a model or it was some optical illusion, or it was some girl sitting in an alley behind weeds, but the way the lighting went over it and the way the background was blurred, it made it look extremely artistic. But when you stood back, it was obviously the reality was this was a really grimy, non-beautiful setting. But that takes away, that shouldn't take away from the validity of the perspective that was coming through the lens. Now, so that's what I mean. Like, all the perspectives are valid, no matter whose you are. So once you're having the greater, saying your perspective is the greater one, then it's tough. But am I doing that? I feel like I'm not. I feel like I'm just saying that my perspective on my particular avenue is at least unique enough that it deserves to be argued with by others that care deeply about the issues. I'm not saying, I try to do everything I can to not say what is right, but that the things we don't know, so we can just keep improving. Even when we do something well, shouldn't be taken as satisfactory. We should keep moving. And that gets me totally off track. But another issue I wish I would have brought up with Adrian, and we probably will in the future, is that when you get these democratic utopias, when you have that power that he claims to want, these things exist in Baltimore, in Chicago, and in the whole state of California. But California doesn't have universal health care. They don't have free college. They don't have these progressive ideals that supposedly you will get once you have the actual power of Democratic Party being in charge. So it's not like, I mean, maybe the idea of the whole philosophy isn't wrong, but to think that the Democratic Party is a pathway to that might be what is wrong. I don't know. I haven't thought about it enough. But in this, we'll talk a little bit more about updating the Constitution, gun control, the Electoral College, which I think did its job. I think it kept the warmonger out of office, and it did what our middle class and our farmers need. And it is my argument that the reason the Electoral College exists is because the influence that the farmers need to have needs to be greater, because they are more important. Their understanding is to the primary things that we need in this country, which is food, and what they say will matter more, and they're going to understand certain issues and need certain things that those of us isolated in the cities just simply aren't going to understand. And I just believe it should be that way, even though I'm one of the ones living in the city, and I'm saying I should have less say. Their knowledge is more important when it comes to certain issues. Now, if enough of us get together and we outnumber them by these dramatic levels that you overcome that, then, I mean, maybe those issues are serious enough. But I don't know, man. I just, when you travel this country and you see how vast it is and you see how important it is and how fragile it is, that our perspective is too invalid. We're kind of blinded. If we're the ones seeing the photo through the beautiful lens, not seeing the grime that's the reality and goes on behind the scenes, we get a picture that is too privileged, too filtered. We talk more about diversity. which it's very important to me that it's for other people to understand that diversity is the result of a good system. It is not the cause of a good system. You can't force diversity, and that makes it a good system. That probably makes it a worse system. We talk about Judge Kavanaugh, or Justice Kavanaugh now, and at the end of this, please stay tuned for Bright Oaks. I hope the full version, and I hope to be talking to John soon, the drummer and singer, and kind of get a little bit more personal episode on some things in the past. We're talking about those memories because, I don't know, maybe he remembers them better than I do. I was only like 16, something like that, when they were a local band that I was going to see. That's about it. So let's get into this episode. And I'm sorry about the technical issues. I am working them through. It's pretty good, at least tolerable, I hope. I've listened to it enough that I think it's a little tolerable trying to make this recording and editing the video. So thanks for listening. Please follow on social media. I'll go ahead and put the links down at the bottom. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, things like that everybody needs. Get a little bit more things unlocked when more subscribers are there, even though I'm not trying to do this and not monetizing anything. At least not yet. If it got big enough, I guess I would. So, I don't know. Please spread these things around. We don't have a network. I don't have resources to get this out. This is about caring about these issues. You're trying to have the discussions go for it, and the only way we can do that is actually by being the ones that spread these things and get them to our friends and neighbors by Crimes and Punishment. The only reason I wrote the book is because not everybody has the time to sit there and listen, or wants to listen, or wants to take things in snippets to understand this underlying philosophy that I think is what we're really talking about. Because it gets very difficult to me to talk about punishment if you believe in rational choice theory. So we have to change our perspectives to even begin, like we have to get on the same page before we can even go forward to even talk about something like gun control, if we don't accept that the human being is an ape. So if you don't understand it's an ape and you think it's special, well then this worldview is really going to blind us from fixing the reality of the situation. Thanks for listening. Let's go.
Nuance. Noun. A subtle difference in or shade of meaning. Expression. Or sound.
Nuance. Noun. A subtle difference
Nuance.
in or shade of meaning.
Noun.
Expression.
A subtle
or
difference
sound.
in or shade of meaning.
Noun.
Expression.
A
or
subtle
sound.
difference in or shade of meaning,
Noun.
expression, or sound.
Noun. A subtle difference in or shade of meaning, expression, or sound.
Oh, true, yeah. No, it was just the battery on my headset died. Okay, so I think the last point was, yeah, so the last point you made was that you don't see a pathway to the kinds of changes that I'm ideally suggesting. And I think you're right, you're absolutely right. There is not really a reasonable pathway to a Senate that is more representation, that more accurately represents the population, that really deviates at all from the Constitution. I think that's the problem. I think that at some point within the next 100 years, I do think we need an update. That's all. You know, it's like you get software updates every once in a while, fix some bugs, iron out some issues. I don't think there's any reason why we can't do that with the Constitution. I'm not saying today, but I think that that our nation has changed. I think that's a good thing. I think change is supposed to happen. And it certainly is reasonable just to update our governing documents. That's all. That's why at legal levels below the Constitution, and amongst the states and other laws that are not governed by the Constitution, that's why they've changed. They've changed because things change. So ultimately, my point is just that I think that at some point we're going to need to do an update, just like you update your operating system or whatever. because we have more information now about how the country works than we did in 1787, which I think is pretty reasonable. And one of the things that I'm suggesting we look at is how the Senate represents population.
Okay, so let's say Constitutional Convention, and smart people sit there and argue about it, and then the politicians vote on which way to go after listening to experts with specific field knowledge. How's that work? Okay.
Sure. I think that's great. I mean,
that's what I'm for. That's essentially my policing
I
system, is that you would have people like that in power, and then you have to listen to the people who are actually experts in the field, and then when you actually get that information, then you debate over what to do. So I would be comfortable with that, because I think you'll lose your Senate argument, but I think we'll gain things when it comes to, like Kanye says with the thing with the 13th Amendment or 14th Amendment, whatever that is. I think he's absolutely right. 13th? 14th? 13th? Which one? Help me. 13th. Okay.
13.
And then with obviously the Second Amendment, which I, as much as people hate me about that, I think that means a dramatic revision. Yes, of course. But I guess we're getting there.
Oh yeah. Well, you and I, you will have no disagreement from me on that. I think the Second Amendment has got to go as it is now. But that's another example, Michael. I mean, in all seriousness, like, I think one of the reasons why we agree, I mean, we haven't talked about the specifics, but why generally we agree that the Second Amendment does not help us now, and why it's outdated, is because, again, in 1787, firearms were very different. It was a very different situation. You couldn't have a concealed firearm in a purse. It was, you had a damn musket.
Yeah, either way. Or, there's a million ways you can argue that way. I mean, you have that they didn't even know technology, or that they were even saying what we're saying. They're saying, I don't know. Reading that thing, I'm not seeing what it's interpreted and accepted as being meaning.
Yes, I agree.
I don't even know that they got it wrong. I don't know they got it wrong, but the way we interpreted it is damn wrong.
Well, and additionally, I would say yes, and I think that the advances in firearm technology need to be considered when you're talking about a law that governs firearms. Well, if we're talking about firearms, then we have to understand how firearms work now in a way that they didn't work in 1787, and that's something that people are refusing to talk about, except clearly you and I. And that's the update that I'm talking about. Let's just do an update. That's one of the ones that needs to be updated.
I just think I'm going to win my senator argument with you.
Okay, all right. I thought you and millions of other people, for sure.
So, all right, the next question. You were talking mainly about diversity, and will the election of younger, more female and non-white representatives in the House change the tenor of the rhetoric? For one, I don't. If you hear out Trump, I don't think his rhetoric is that bad, especially when it comes to race. I mean, some other things like saying dumb shit and whatever, his inability to be, his social awkwardness often. But when it comes to race, I don't find him saying anything very, very off-putting. I think towards cultures, sure, but people miss cultures for race all the time. I think we are messed up with this diversity issue. So here's what the science says. The science says that countries and parliaments and businesses that have more diverse command staff, essentially executives, they are better countries and better businesses, and they are right. But the thing is the diversity is the side effect, not the cause. So what we end up doing, especially the left, is putting in the diversity like it's a fix when it's not. When you put Obama in there, you can call him black all you want, but that's a typical white neoliberal. Hands down, everything he does is, I mean, the blackest thing ever been around Barack Obama is his wife. So which he had to woo and marry into to even be accepted into such around such blackness. So those identity politics are part of the thing that I think is very harmful. Now, if we were doing things right, you would see more diversity, yes, but it does not work the other way around, because you're just picking the people who came through the same things, because diversity does not actually afford you anything other than maybe forcing the male-female thing. But I'm not sure that that's would be as effective either. Most likely there's a reason why more females don't want to go into politics. So I don't know why if we start forcing them in, then you're picking from a lower section of the barrel than who's actually qualified upon merit.
So are you saying that that the goal of diversity, or rather not the goal, the result, having more diversity, let's say in politics, in corporate governance, whatever, that is ultimately beneficial, but you question how we
No,
get
it's
there?
not beneficial. It is a result. So it is of a
Of
good
what?
government or a good operating command staff or a fluidly operating organization. So
And how is racial and ethnic diversity a result of good
yeah, I
operating?
don't know why. So that's something we don't understand the mechanism of, but that is what all the data tells us. So worldwide, I mean, America likes to get focused on America data, and America data is kind of largely irrelevant to me. It's just a piece of the puzzle. Human activity is human activity. It doesn't matter where you are. So when we look
Mm-hmm.
all over the world, that's exactly what we see is that the countries that have this are better countries. They have more progressive ideas. They're safer, things like that. But
Right.
that we're confusing the issue. Good governments result in executives that are more representative of their people. It's not that forcing the
Yeah.
representative in makes a good government. It's literally backwards.
Okay. Well, then I think we agree. I think that Tuesday has proven
If we got
your point,
if we
actually.
got there from the system versus the people. So did we vote in more people because that were of these identity politics because we were convinced that we should elect them in because of those identity politics, which would be the exact wrong reason. So if we put up the best candidates and the system made the best candidates and they happen to be these other things, then that would make more sense. So I don't know what this is yet.
Yeah. So I think it's we can't. It's not a monolith. We can't make a blanket statement because we're talking about literally hundreds and hundreds of local elections and candidates, particularly in the House. But I think to your point, that people felt that electing leaders that were more like them. For example, in Minnesota, we have a Somalian woman. So I don't know if you know, there's a very large Somalian population in Minnesota. A lot of people don't know this. For whatever reason, it became a Somalian enclave, particularly in just outside of
Yeah,
Minneapolis and St.
yeah,
Paul,
I
I
know what
believe.
you're talking about.
So there's a large Somalian enclave there. They elected the first Somalian woman that will be sent to the House. To me, that's not people just electing a Somalian woman because they think a Somalian woman needs to be in Congress. That's people electing someone that represents
Agreed.
them, and that I think is exactly what we want. And that's also the case with the two indigenous women, the two first indigenous women to be sent to the House as well, because these were indigenous Native Americans, whatever term you want to use. I've heard many different ones used. These people, these populations elected these women. One of them happens to be gay as well. So I think that is an example of the system working effectively insofar as people are electing someone that they feel represents them because they have a shared experience. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that makes perfect
Yeah,
sense.
that's fine. That's
Certainly,
especially with the Somalians. So, like with them, I think that's a good case because those are all legal immigrants and everything else. So those people are Americans. Where this gets confused, I've spent a lot of time on the left and the right, and sitting at dinner tables, and where this is confused on the right is they see this as what will happen with the Democrats that the left is pushing is to allow in illegal immigrants, grant them citizenship, and then control the demographics. So if we aren't very particular about how the Somalian case in Minnesota is very different than a lot of the Hispanic Latino cases, then because you got to understand that if the people in power are largely white people in this country and largely conservative. That's where all your money lies, and it's historic, but that's fine. So you have to be on those people's side, or you at least have to appeal to them in some way, shape, or form. And if you're going to set up, and
yeah,
the adversarial condition that gets set up with letting immigrants in because those demographics change the thing so that the left is in power, when that's not tied to the good of the people who already have some kind of power or vested interest in this country, man, they're going to dig in, and the left's going to get the shit kicked out of them. And I think the left is very much on the verge of that, because of that's probably the biggest one right there, is not being able to distinguish the Somalians from the illegal immigrants.
Right. So just so I understand, you're saying that when conservatives see a more diverse leadership amongst Democrats, they wrongly associate that with enabling illegal immigration?
No, I
or
think
are
the
you
way the
saying
Democrats say it, so their rhetoric around it doesn't distinguish how those Somalian cultures, which are Americans, that's what I'm saying. Like, if they were like, I'm Somali, I'd be like, bitch, you're an American. I don't know what else to tell you. If you're Somalian, get the fuck out and go back to Somalia. So as long as you're here, that is what you are. And those people are very much American. And even though they're isolated, they're trying, I know that group, and they're trying to kind of get into society more and be more part of it. They are trying to be American, which is very different than the rhetoric that demographics control population, control the flow. So, you know, we know Texas is going to be Democratic in about, I don't know, 12 years maybe. So, for sure. So if you keep letting people into Texas, in order to swing that, the people in power are going to dig on the heels, and that's how you get violence.
So, and are you suggesting that illegal immigrants are voting?
No. But if you let them in and then you grant them amnesty and then they vote, well, then the demographics switch entirely. So if you
right? Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. Yeah. So you're suggesting there's a perception amongst conservatives that that increased diversity will result in illegal immigrants being given amnesty, forced, or being given citizenship, and then once that has happened, they will vote, and that will change the electorate to be more progressive, because formerly illegal immigrants will be voting a particular way.
Right, and it's a forced idea. It's not that they're not Americans that came through the system the way they were supposed to come through, and they're now Americans. So that will be be people who aren't America telling Texas farmers what they should be doing, and that I think I have to agree with their argument on that's a preposterous idea. But then I have to adamantly fight them when it comes to like the Somalian population.
So how do you since we're on the topic, how do you feel about, for example, Latino children who were brought here illegally when they were, let's say, infants? They weren't born here, but let's say they were infants, or they're 2 years old, they're toddlers. They were raised here. They went to American public schools. They have all American friends. They didn't choose to come here when they were infants or toddlers. And this is the whole, this is the DACA conversation, right? Deferred action for childhood arrival. These are people who arrived here when they were kids, and they didn't have the agency to decide if they could pursue the legal route for becoming a citizen or just for becoming an immigrant. So what do we do about them?
Personally, I don't have much problem with somebody that was born here doing it, but I think those. But
they were not here.
What? Oh, I mean, if they're young enough that they can't even, they're not of any kind of legal responsibility or aware of their situation or their parent. Yeah, as long as they're under their parents' custody, I'd have a hard time arguing that they shouldn't be here. Maybe once you're, maybe draw a line at 7, which is the legal age for criminal responsibility anyway. Draw the age of 7. If you were here younger than that, then so be it. But what their parents did was still illegal. So there has to be some kind of line for that. And those things have to come with increased border security. We are a nation. That is a perfectly valid argument. Now, I almost feel that if our border was completely locked down, and like say 2 parents were from a country that was so bad they didn't have opportunity, and they put their kid in a freaking tray vault and threw that thing over the fence and like risked it dying so that it could land on the other side and become an American citizen suddenly, and then those people had to go to jail for the rest of their life. To me personally, I feel like, okay, you guys earned it. That kid gets to be a citizen now because you guys sacrificed, and it just obviously really meant something to you. But to have it open like it generally is, and to allow people to continue to come in while you're granting that, this is like, that's just not the system. It's not how it works. It's not how our resources are. I think it's very different now than when you have a welfare state versus when you didn't have a welfare state. So if the rule is that you can come here, but yet you don't get any benefits, you got to till this land and become an American, and then your kids or something can get there. That makes a lot of sense to me too. But you can't let people into the country. No country's should be doing that without complete and tight controls. You just shouldn't. It's a nation. I mean, it's our social construct, our paradigm, how our world is organized.
So you feel that border security on the southern border addresses that?
Oh, so everything is about deterrence. So it's just like the whole gun argument. It's not about whether guns kill people. Well, obviously people kill people, but guns make killing people easier. So the same thing is true with border crossings. You have a cost. Now, if the cost is zero, then people will just go back and forth as they choose. But if the higher you make the cost, then the more important it has to be and the more meaningful it has to be to them. So I'm more concerned about making the cost of an illegal border crossing go up versus the idea that it would stop it.
Well, I guess my concern is that the data doesn't show that is the problem, particularly in terms of Mexican immigrants, because we're seeing there are more Mexican immigrants that are returning home than are actually coming here. This is an inaccurate perception that a lot of people have. So from I think it was up until 2014,
hold on. That's because there's no cost. Right, that's exactly what I'm explaining. So if you can go back and forth with a zero cross, then you can go back with ease, you can come with ease. So they go back because they know they can come back whenever they want. There's no cost.
Well, no, but the net amount is lower. So from 2009 to 2014.
I hear you, but I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm interrupting, but you're talking about crime stats. Okay, this is where my purview is. That data is not accurate. That's not a number that we know. You're never going to know that number about how many people come in and out illegally. It's like saying how many drug offenses are there committed in the country at any point in time. We have absolutely zero idea, because that statistic is a measurement of what somebody is writing down in their observation. It's not an objective measurement. It's a measurement from the police, not a measurement from reality.
Well, but this isn't just illegal immigration. This is from 2009 to 2014. There were about 1 million immigrants who left the United States, who went home to Mexico. But we only had 870,000 that came to the United States at that same time. So that's a decline, because I think illegal immigration from Mexico peaked. I think around, it was like just before Obama was president. I think maybe 06 or 07, when it was very, very, very high. But that number has dropped significantly. So I'm not questioning your overall philosophy. I just don't know if border security is really where the resources should be placed, because a lot of people fly here. They come from other countries. They're not just coming from Mexico. They're coming from all over the world.
Those are other issues. So I mean, visas are administrative issues, and then you're talking about using state violence to hunt out those people and root them out, which is very different than just putting up a border. The border's almost complete. It's just that it's porous. So yeah, I mean, you could talk about wasting money and all that stuff. Sure, those arguments are going to be there, but it's not about whether I want a zero cost to get out, a zero cost to leave our country, and an extremely high cost to get in. So the numbers coming in and out are absolutely irrelevant to my positions. My positions are based on perpetual systems of improvement that will last throughout time. I don't care about the immediate situation now. You should have controls on any of your borders just like any other country does. And that means you can't come in here illegally. It's like the idea of the caravan now. They can come here legally if they want. The problem is you cannot come here illegally, period. Like, there's no way I'm going to be able to be convinced that somebody should be able to come into our country illegally and stay here. That's fucking crazy.
Well, and how do you feel about provisions for asylum seekers, which is
I'm fine.
certainly
I'm
a
fine with that.
convention?
Yeah, that's a legal way in. But you need to go to a legal port of entry. And if you are an asylum seeker, you don't make it through Mexico and come to America. Mexico offered you asylum. You have to legally, from international convention, you have to stop at the first country of safety, not the ones with the best fucking jobs.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. What else? Here's something that I wanted to talk about. I sent you, this was yesterday, I think, or the day before, I sent you this tweet from SE Cup, because I think she's a very interesting voice, because I feel like used to be more conservative. She was certainly more conservative during the Obama administration, but now that she is sort of representing conservatism, but under the Trump administration, she is a lot more critical, certainly of the president. So in this tweet that she made, that was 2 days ago, on November 7th, she said, "To be sure, Democrats' House win is at least in one way a gift to Trump. They will focus the next 2 years on investigations, subpoenas, hearings, and impeachment threats. Democratic political operatives and the media will love it, and America will hate it." So I shared this with a number of my progressive friends, and we all actually agreed. I think there is a great deal of rhetoric. Well, I don't think there is objectively a great deal of rhetoric circulating amongst conservatives that Democrats are obstructionists. And of course, that's a bit rich considering how much obstruction the Republicans were guilty of.
About this Republic, no president has ever put in somebody in their last year.
No, that's not true. It's happened at least twice, Michael.
Really?
We have facts that demonstrate that. Yes.
Or
yes.
like what?
So
like it must have been 100 years ago. Or
and
something.
also,
it's definitely not modern error.
And also, but Michael, it doesn't even really matter. What matters is that this was definitely the first time ever that a Senate simply refused to hold hearings. That has never happened before. Never. And it was partially due to, I believe, a false confidence in the president at the time that Hillary Clinton would be elected the next president of the United States and that she would get to appoint justices and that it wouldn't be a problem. So he chose to not do a recess appointment, which I believe was a mistake for the Democrats. And so we ended up with Mitch McConnell stealing a Supreme Court seat that should have gone to Merrick Garland. Okay, so regardless, per SE Cup's tweet, which is perceptions that the country will have of the next 2 years and what Democrats do in Washington with their power that they've now seized in the House or that they'll have come January. I do believe it's going to be very challenging because part of the House's job is oversight, is to be a watchdog. That's part of the checks and balances that are built into the Constitution. However, the average American may not understand that. They also may not care. And they're going to be looking for ways to confirm their beliefs that Democrats are obstructionists. And Donald Trump is very good at painting himself as a victim. Oh, the media has been very unfair to me. He uses the word unfair a lot. You can search his tweets for the word unfair, and he uses it a great deal. And he's very good at painting himself as a victim. So I think Democrats are going to have to be really careful to seize upon their oversight powers very, very specifically, and only when they know that they can uncover something that really will be damning. Because I think that it's going to be, it could really set us up for the president being reelected in 2020 if the majority of the nation feels like the Democrats have been whiny bitches for 2 years in the House and done what is essentially the equivalent of the Benghazi hearings for Hillary Clinton, the longest House investigative committee ever, longer than Watergate, longer than the 9/11 Commission, and longer than Monica Lewinsky, because they will feel that it reinforces the average American may feel that too much oversight, even though it's their job, even though we know that it's their job and we know how the government works, but the average American maybe doesn't know that, and they're going to feel like, to S.E. Cupp's point, that it's that impeachment threats and Maxine Waters ranting and raving. I do love her myself, but I know lots of people don't. That Maxine Waters ranting and raving and demanding Trump's tax returns and all that will reinforce the image of Trump as a victim. Oh, you know, they don't understand him. They don't like him, and they're being unfair, which he will be sure to play up because he always does that, and he's so good with that messaging. So I think it's going to be very challenging for the Democrats to find that right balance. And I think that to her point that it is in a way it is a kind of gift, because we know that the Democrats are going to be they're gnashing their teeth, like ready to get into the House and fuck some shit up, which I understand and respect, and that's also their job. But I'm also thinking about the long game, wanting to get this president out of office in 2020 and replaced with a Democrat or potentially a moderate Republican, which could potentially happen, although not likely. So I think there's a lot of truth to what she's saying, and unfortunately a lot of the Democrats that I spoke to in reference to this tweet, and also sort of projecting about the next 2 years, really agree that that's going to be a big challenge.
Yeah, I can't argue that. I think it's going to be a huge challenge. But I certainly side with Trump in a lot of the things where I think the way that he's treated is completely unfair and things are taken out of gross context. But I think that's the mood we're in now. I think if Hillary was in power, or the odds are you'd be hearing the same kind of rhetoric come from the right. It's just the overall idea of where we are. But when it comes to let's say, okay, do you know the Resist movement, like the official organization? You know what I'm talking about, though? Yeah, like the black sign with Resist on it.
Oh, yeah.
So I was approached back in Standing Rock about joining the Resist movement, and I signed on as one of the original founders. As we were having the conversation in Standing Rock, so I didn't have much time to focus on the conversation, but the idea was that we were going to do progressive things and resist these bad policies. That's what I was told briefly. And then as I got involved in the organization, was doing the calls, the conference calls among the leaders and stuff like that, I kept asking them one question. What are we resisting? And the only answer I ever got was Trump. And I said, well, I'm out, because I don't resist people. You know, I resist policies, ideas, things that are tangible. I'm not here to just fucking resist for the sake of resisting. That's childish, and I have no idea how you think that would benefit. Like, my fight, again, is to end violence and to end oppression. So you want to be the bigger oppressor? Fuck you, I'm out of here. So that's what I think. I think the left is very wrong on what the vast majority of this country wants. When you say a democracy, I'm going to be shocked if President Trump doesn't win the majority of the population next time. So I just think we're very confused and caught up in narratives that people in power are continuing to give us, and that obstructionist thing is what they want. It's not what benefits us, and I don't think that's representing what people actually want. I think the people who are very loud about the resisting and the obstructionist idea are very small percentages. I think that when the Tea Party was kind of doing that shit, I think the vast majority of Republicans didn't agree with them, and I think the same thing's going to happen no matter what. I forget how you said it, but like whoever is being the bully baby is not going to be perceived well.
Right. Yeah. So I think it's important for us to dive into a little bit what you're talking about in terms of like resistance in general and the resist movement. What are we resisting? Well, yes, you ask anyone who considers themselves to be a part of the resistance movement, what are they resisting? They'll say one of two things, or both. They'll say the president, they'll say Donald Trump, or they'll say the Republican Party. So I think to your point, we had talked about earlier on about really understanding policy over people. And I think that that's true. I think that a lot of people don't do the work to actually understand policy and how policy affects them as opposed to just figureheads. Well, Donald Trump is, in addition to having a lot of power, certainly in terms of his appointments and executive action, he also is a figurehead. That's part of the role of the president, is to represent the government. It's representational. It's not just direct. It's not, I'm sitting here writing laws all day. That's not the president's job, except in the form of executive order. So the resistance to President Trump is, even if we agree that maybe it isn't rooted, or we certainly agree it's not rooted in policy. Let's say he wrote no executive action. Let's say there were none. I mean, there have been many, but let's say there were none. And it was just about his personality, the way he comports himself and conducts himself on the international stage. I do think that what a lot of people are seeing is that some of his perspectives, some of the way that he speaks, and how brusque and occasionally rude he is. Also his history, the things that we know he said in the past about women. These are, what we're seeing is that is enough for people to feel like it's something they need to resist. And the reason that they feel they need to resist it is because, for better or worse, that sets an example for other people. I do feel that the attitudes and behavior of the president sets an example. This is any president, not just President Trump, but in particular because he's so polarizing, and he has said some things in the past, in the distant past, and in the more recent past that are really, really inflammatory, that it does embolden people who agree with him. It's not that he's creating people who didn't exist before that would not have otherwise felt the way that he does about, let's say, about women, or about journalists, saying that journalists are the enemy of the people, which of course is ridiculous. So the resistance is to someone who represents a lot of toxicity, and it allowing people to feel that the toxicity that they have within them, whether it's against Muslims or against trans people or against immigrants or against women or against blacks or whatever it is, they feel, this guy, he says what he wants. There are no consequences for what he says. He's talked about grabbing women by the pussy. He's talked about blocking all Muslims from entering the United States.
No, he
I don't
has
really like
not.
Muslims. No, I mean,
he has never
Michael,
said blocking all Muslims, ever.
No, he said there needs to be a complete and total shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until we can figure out what is going on. That's a direct quote. He's on video saying that. And in the document, in the executive action that he wrote, that the White House wrote, it was on the White House website titled Muslim ban. This is, I mean, that's just the way that it is. I mean, that's not something that we should spend time arguing, because that's just a fact. If you believe that's not what his...
Dude, he never banned all Muslims. I mean, that's the thing, is you take misspoke, or even like the grab him by the pussy. Like, I hate how you guys make me defend him. Like, grab by the pussy was before he was president. What has he ever, and you say race, like literally no one can point to anything racist this dude has ever said in his history. Dude, I've said a lot of racist shit. You're going to find it if someone entrusted me.
No, I agree with you. Listen, I'm not saying that he is necessarily on record saying outwardly racist things. What we're looking at is patterns. Again, we're looking at patterns of behavior.
They're not there. I mean, like, I'm sorry, but I can't go, I'm so tired of hearing that go unaddressed. Like, I don't know what that means. Like, what racist thing has he ever done? Pattern.
Okay.
What pattern of racist things does he have?
I think okay. I'm not sure this is. I'm happy to go here. I don't know if this is the most entertaining for your listeners or it's the most productive for us, considering the other stuff we want to get to. But I think let me conclude the original point, and then if you want to go further, we can. But my original point is that this man represents a more braggadocious, a more aggressive, a more bold personality for the White House. I don't think anyone will dispute that. I think that's particularly why his supporters like him. That's what they wanted. They wanted someone who was going to shake things up. We've seen hundreds, if not more, interviews with Trump supporters who say, I want someone who's going to shake things up, someone who doesn't take any bullshit, right? So as part of that, it requires a certain level of like I said before, kind of brusqueness in your approach. Let's say we forget about the things that he's done in the past. Let's say we forget about the grab him by the pussy comment. We forget about all the stuff.
But who cares? I
mean,
but even who grab him by the pussy? Who fucking cares?
No,
because it's not even an assault, though. It's not even illegal. It's puritanical shit coming from the left.
Listen, I'm not including that in part of this.
Yeah, but if it's bad, why is it bad for him to have said that? I still don't understand that.
Well, I will explain that to you, Michael. Actually, because I think it's also related to Brett Kavanaugh. I think it's related to Brett Kavanaugh.
There's zero evidence that Brett Kavanaugh ever affected any woman ever in his entire history.
We're not, but again, we're not, this is not a trial. We're not talking about convicting these people. This is the court of public opinion.
The court of public opinion should have some fucking evidence.
Okay, well, no, the nature of the court of public opinion is that it is not evidence-based.
But I'm not going to care about the public's opinion that they have formulated with no, I often say to people, like, you haven't respected your argument enough to research it, so why the fuck should I respect it? And the same.
But again, yes, but there's a thread here, Michael. I agree with you. I believe that people do not do their own due diligence to research their positions, to find a basis for their opinions. Completely
but what
agree.
Was the principle that was wrong with him saying grab him by the pussy? Because what he said was, is they'll let you.
Yes, right. You can do whatever you want. Yes, yeah. Listen. So in the case of Donald Trump and also in the case of Brett Kavanaugh, what I think a lot of people believe, but I'll speak for myself, and I do know people agree, is that when you're talking about people in these extraordinarily public positions of power, the President of the United States is one of, if not the most powerful man in the world. The Supreme Court is certainly the most powerful judicial body in the country. That's the point. So the belief amongst many is that these people are held to a different standard. It is necessarily a different standard. We're not saying these people are standard. No, I'm not saying it's my personal standard.
But that's what you're about to explain, I promise.
Well, okay, well, let me finish, and then you can tell me what you think. So lots of people believe, it's not just me, I mean, this is people all over the political spectrum, and including some Republicans like Anna Navarro
I don't care of the list of idiots who agrees with another idiot's position.
Okay, so what a lot of people believe is that you have to hold these officials to a higher standard than you would hold, let's say.
What is the higher standard? That is a subjective term. I don't know what that means. So this is why I get frustrated with it. You can't give me terms that are subjective. I don't care.
No, it's not. It's a belief in. Well, I mean, it's about moral objectivism, in my opinion.
Your morals.
If you believe,
I don't care about your morals, and no one should until you enact actions on people.
Right. But the right, because, well, yes, to your point, absolutely. I mean, you shouldn't be criticized for things that you think. I mean, like there was a great HBO documentary on this called Thought Crime, which was about the guy, the cannibalist cop. Do you remember this back in New York years ago? It was the guy who like did he had all these fantasies about killing and eating women, but he never actually did it. It was all like online. It was all role play, right? So can we condemn him or convict him of anything just because he never actually killed anyone, he never actually hurt anyone, right? So to your point, yeah, I think you're absolutely right that we can only go on the actions that people take. However, when you're looking at, for example, with Brett Kavanaugh, the point of the Senate hearing is a job interview where people on both sides of the political spectrum can ask the nominee questions and see how they respond to evaluate their fitness.
And you're telling me that's what that was? Fuck, dude. Come on. This dude was qualified by every measurement.
He was. Well, that's the point. The point is that it's a job interview.
He was qualified by every measurement. So the left went to making up stories, of which two or three have already recanted and admitted that they were lying. There's zero evidence, but you didn't believe any of Bill Clinton's accusers. Let me go through even your individual Facebook, and we can look up how often you believed Clinton's accusers. Like, this shit is fucking nonsense. That Kavanaugh hearing was nonsense. There's nothing wrong with Brett Kavanaugh. There's zero evidence that he did anything. And if anybody asked me shit like that on a job interview, God, I wouldn't want the job. And who the hell would want to be a Supreme Court justice if that's the way they're going to treat people? Seriously. Well, these people are pre-vetted, essentially. How the fuck? You didn't say anything with Brett Kavanaugh. Nobody said anything with Brett Kavanaugh was an extremely powerful federal judge. But only when he's part of Trump, dude. You're gonna have to let that case go at some point in time. I'm gonna hear out your argument right now. But as an individual that sleeps on this tonight, what happened to Brett Kavanaugh, I find completely unacceptable, and will assure that I never vote for a Democrat for the foreseeable future, ever. Well, so that could have been my son.
I guess how stringent you believe the requirements should be to rise to that
I'm going to tell you, I'm a fucking retired cop. Okay, so you need probable cause to arrest somebody. You need reasonable suspicion to begin investigating something, and you can have a hunch to look their way. This doesn't even rise to a hunch.
Well, no, you had a relatively credible accuser. I'm not saying
what is credible. I don't understand. Okay. If I'm a cop and I go to hold on, please. Like, I'm somebody that does these investigations, and I've done it for a long time. So if I were to knock on a door, 911, and your neighbor says that you went over and raped her 2 hours ago, and then I go to your house and find out that you don't even live there, and you've never been in that house ever where she said you were and the rape took place, what would a cop do?
Well, so Michael, I think that's my point.
I'm talking about a 911 call level of serious. This is far below this. I'm talking about a lower standard. So if you can't even, the FBI already investigated this stuff and found nothing to be there. I don't get it at all.
They spent 5 days investigating because Jeff Flake said that it had to be done by the following Friday. Yes. Okay. So my point is not that we have evidence again, because that's again not what this is about. A Senate hearing is not a criminal trial.
I'm not talking. It doesn't matter. Then you're just talking about people making shit up. I don't understand that.
But again, like, you haven't let me finish. My point is not that we should believe every accusation that anyone ever makes, whether it's against me or you or a potential Supreme Court justice. My point. The genesis of this part of the conversation was, what are people resisting, right? What is the resistance? And what I'm telling you is, whether I agree with it or not, I'm not saying I necessarily do or not, but I'm saying that the fact is that when people feel what people feel they're resisting right now is behavior in the public square, particularly in politics, that they feel is inappropriate. I'm not saying sexually inappropriate. I'm saying just in the case of Brett Kavanaugh, he did not comport himself in a way in the Senate hearing that was very dignified, and he apologized for it. He apologized. He said, I got very passionate. I'm a dad and a husband, and I can get emotional. And the only point that I'm making is that I believe it's appropriate to hold our elected officials to a higher standard.
What is the higher standard?
And that means that when you're doing a job interview that is not a criminal proceeding, that is not an evidence-based
and
proceeding,
someone accuses you of gang rape,
court of law, but instead a job interview, it's fair to evaluate someone based on their performance in the job interview. I'm not talking about a potential rape. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about in the job interview. It did not indicate to me that he was capable of comporting himself in a way that was balanced and composed.
Dude, you are taking 1 second out of this guy's entire career, putting your subjective opinion that he doesn't do that when he's been accused of rape. I need you to apply those. He was accused of gang rape in front of the nation by senators and how. So I think you need to take that professionalism over to those goddamn senators who have accused him and did that. That was unprofessional. That was ridiculous. That was destructive. You don't come up here and make up some nonsense and put on a show against this guy for a job interview. If you go to a job interview and I put up your ex-girlfriend and bring her there and say that she said that you raped her, like, get the fuck out of here. That cannot be acceptable. Can't be.
Well, but again, the other senators aren't the ones who are applying for the job.
They're the ones that ask the questions. Do they have no more responsibility in your world that they accused a man of gang rape with absolutely no evidence on a public stage?
Well, they were not the ones doing it.
Yes, they were, because they already had it, filtered it, and leaked it. That's not true. The FBI already pursued these things. They already had the answers. This was clearly political grandstanding so that they could do these things. Dude, you got to see through that one.
Well, what I said from the beginning was that he was going to be confirmed. I knew he was going to be confirmed. The numbers in the Senate were there. It was going to happen. There was no question he was going to be confirmed. What merit could you
not confirm him on? You think that because he had one momentary, even by your standard, to think that one moment of so-called incivility, which I think he shouldn't have apologized for. I think he cucked out, and he should have never said shit. I think what he said was perfectly acceptable.
Well, I will tell you, actually, to be 1,000,000% honest, which is all I've been with you this whole conversation, the thing that was most distressing for me was not any of that. Not any of that. The thing that was most distressing for me was simply that he is on record indicating that he believes the president can pardon himself.
Why not? I do.
And I believe that. Well, because, Michael, as someone who understands and respects the Constitution, that is not in keeping with the checks and balances that are built into the federal government.
I mean, all he is speaking on what the law says. So that's the thing, is like, this dude, do you know that they had like an evaluation? He had like, it was like 95% of the exact same rulings and belief as Gorsuch. So I don't even understand what we're arguing for. We're not focused on anything that has to do with policy, and this is the left idea that you are helping me understand, but I'm still remaining baffled by.
Well, I'll tell you what. What you are absolutely right about is that the proceedings at the Kavanaugh hearing didn't, certainly, whether justified or not, I know you're saying they weren't, but whether they were or not, did not help any moderates to see Democrats favorably.
Nope.
Sure.
And I guess I would just like to shed the thing and not say I'm a moderate and say I'm more like a independent or something like that. But I'm sorry, that turned me off so bad, and I feel like I'm somebody that's super understanding of why people are doing the things that they're doing. And the way
Michael, I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all. I don't think you're alone. And just so everyone who hears this knows, I'm not condoning any of it. I'm just saying I understand why people feel that.
Because they think they need power. They want to oppress.
Right. Well, I'm not sure about oppress.
Sure. They tried to oppress him on a public stage. Absolutely. They tried to silence him by fabricated, or let's evenly say absolutely unevidenced accusations. They tried to silence him. That silence is violence, and it's a path to oppression. Absolutely.
Well, they tried to get him not confirmed.
Which was to silence him. Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah, right. They tried to get him not confirmed.
So you didn't go off the merits of what his actions are. They went off the merits of an allegation. Now, sure, maybe they could have, like you're saying, maybe they could have convinced me that there was something wrong about his policies and his positions, but I didn't hear anything.
Well, I believe that the disagreement that you and I, one of the disagreements that we're having is I do believe that his performance in the so-called job interview was not very...
That's like me giving you a job interview for riding a motorcycle and then me being like, well, he didn't rake his yard well.
Well, but Michael, we're not talking about that. Like, we're talking about a very specific, very powerful position. It's different.
He's a judge. He's a legal person. He's very specialized. Almost all of us are extremely specialized. So the dude probably can't drive a car worth a fuck. But it doesn't mean anything.
But we're talking about But again, like the original question was about what are these people resisting?
I
Why
understand,
are they resisting?
but you're saying his response. But his response wasn't to a job interview. His response was his response to unsubstantiated allegations of being a gang rapist on a public stage in front of his children and his family and the entire world. That is an entirely different ballgame than being a judge.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. That is when he got emotional and lost his composure.
I don't think he lost his composure. I think he was humanized, and I felt for him, and I'll probably stand behind him for the rest of his career because I saw him as a human being.
Well, be that as it may, millions of people who disagreed with him and his performance did not feel that way. I'm not saying whether that's right or not. I'm saying that that's just the fact. They didn't like it. They didn't like the feeling that they got from him. And I think that the outcome of the midterms on Tuesday is in part a reflection of that. And when you said what are people resisting, these are the things that they're resisting. It's not about policy. It's not about policy. What they're resisting is partially about policy. The new tax plan, a whole bunch of executive orders that people have not agreed with. I'm less advocating the merits of these things. I'm just stating the fact that people feel like this is something that they should be resisting, and that's what the resistance is. It is to President Trump and many in his cabinet. The fact that, for example, an oil executive could become the chairman of the EPA, the very agency dismantling the very agency that he is charged with protecting, with leading. So that's what the resistance is. It's not just because Trump said grab her by the pussy. It's way more than that. It's way more complex than that. And it's also about, even for Republicans, okay, let's talk just about Republicans who are horrified by the rejection of norms. Norms are not laws, okay, so they can change, but there are norms in Washington that have been respected by both parties for decades and decades and decades. And I don't think all of them are bad. I think the norm of presidential candidates releasing their tax returns is totally acceptable, totally appropriate, totally acceptable. It's not a law. We're not talking about a law. It's not required. It's just a norm that people would do because they felt that it was about increasing transparency, having the American people understand who they really are, that they have nothing to hide. Well, this president chose not to do that. That is his choice. It is not something that he needs to be legally sanctioned for. But again,
it's a different ballgame. I mean, I know that the perception is, but what I'm trying to say is that all of these arguments are incredibly weak. So I don't understand how you're going to win anything. Not you. You know, I'm saying the left.
Well, let me tell you, Michael. Let me tell you. Let's say they are. It still doesn't matter. Even unfounded beliefs are beliefs. I mean, I think you're an atheist.
Yeah,
I am.
What I'm saying is it's not winning over the country. You're literally going to lose democratic elections with these positions.
Oh, you're right. Oh, you're absolutely. There's no disagreement there. Absolutely right. Like I said, I'll be the first to criticize the Democrats And I am a Democrat. I am a registered Democrat, proud to vote Democrat whenever I do. But I do think this is a real problem for the Democrats, is that we have not found a way to unite the country around our message.
You got to be principled.
And that is
if the message is only these people don't act like I think they should, well, that doesn't even work for you and another liberal and another leftist, because they're going to. I mean, I think. Oh, yeah, I think most right-wing people would definitely call me a leftist. I mean, if you were to draw down my policies, I'm fucking left. And it's like, how am I the enemy of the left because I don't go with this hateful rhetoric?
Well, listen, we definitely agree that a lot of what the Democrats have done over the past 2 years.
Our side sucks, Adrian.
And certainly before, in 2016, leading up to the presidential election, we didn't do it right. It was not right. It was not the smartest strategy. In some cases, there was no strategy. And the thing that's missing for me, and I said this earlier, is a real message. What is the message of the Democrats? Of the Republicans, it's make America great again. Even though that was Donald Trump's message, it has been adopted by the larger Republican Party. That's something everyone can understand. They can get behind it. It's rah, 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 MAGA, 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 red hat, great. Simple, uniting people, done. The Democrats do not have that. We have not had it for decades. And if we can't find that, it's going to be a real problem for us in 2020. And I'm scared. You know what? It's funny you ask, because a number of my friends, we have tried to come up with this, and it's so hard. And I think one of the reasons it's so hard is because Democrats are so worried about leaving people out. And so, if we leave out this subgroup or this marginalized community, then they won't vote for us. If we leave out this vulnerable community, then they'll think we don't care about them. So the challenge for Democrats is finding a message that is broad enough that everyone can get behind it. It can work for white people. It can work for non-white people. It can work for young and old. It can work for lower class. It can work for middle class. It can work for working class. And that's what's going to get us the White House in 2020. And I cannot think of anything, and I've done branding and messaging and writing for a number of NGOs and campaigns, not political campaigns, and I feel like I should be able to come up with something. I don't know. I don't know what it is. And that's, to your point, like a real problem. Because when Democrats are viewed as whiny bitches, it's going to mean a lot of success for the Republican Party. Now, I think we've gotten a little bit of a confidence boost with the results of Tuesday's midterms, with the results of the midterms on Tuesday, because we've seen some good success for the Democratic Party. I'm not arguing the merits of it. I'm just saying, as a fact, this is good for the Democratic Party. We have made some headway. We're going to have control of the House. We've also talked about how that could potentially be a pitfall if that oversight is abused. But what is missing, even with this success on Tuesday, what's still missing is a message. I'm actually surprised we got as far as we did with pretty much no message.
God damn it, you had it, though. You had it 2 years ago. That's why I'm just so disappointed, partly because of that. Maybe I'm holding animosity because everything was fine 2 years ago before your girl and the Democrats fucked everything up and took the nomination away from Bernie.
Yeah, right. Well, let me.
It was right there.
Let me comment on that. So here's the deal. You will get no argument from me on this. The DNC fucked up. They made the wrong choice. It was wrong. I don't believe that Hillary Clinton literally stole votes in the primary. I don't believe that the fact that she received more votes in the primary was the result of a conspiracy.
Well, I mean, there was a background conspiracy. Come on. I mean, they were all approved her beforehand.
Well, no, let me tell you. Right. Well, no, it was simply that the leadership at the DNC believed falsely that their best weapon against the Republicans was Hillary Clinton. They said, this is our weapon. She's going to win. They were wrong about that. And because they made that choice, they promoted her, and voters responded to that. That's why voters voted for Hillary Clinton. That's why she got more votes than Bernie Sanders. That was a miscalculation on the DNC's part. They thought her experience, the fact that she's a woman coming off of the Obama administration with the first black man, they made a lot of miscalculations. Also, her campaign made a lot of miscalculations in the Rust Belt, as we know. But what you're certainly right about is that there was a lot of momentum coming off of the Obama administration and into support for Bernie Sanders. And I do believe that Bernie Sanders probably would have defeated Donald Trump because he had. Yeah, I think we agree. I think he probably would have defeated Donald Trump because he was calling out a lot of the issues that Middle America was feeling, a lot of the economic issues, a lot of the issues around jobs and the oligarchy running things, the plutocracy of billionaires running the show, getting the bullshit out of politics, but not in a way that was as corrosive as the Trump campaign was expressing. Bernie Sanders, for better or worse, I think he did a great job of energizing people as an old, like crusty, like gray-haired Jew. He did a fantastic job of really energizing young people and working class people. And Hillary she just couldn't do that. And I supported her. You know, once she won the nomination, I was like, all right, well, this is what we got. So we're going to go with this because this is what we got. But I am still disappointed about that too. I'm still angry about it. I'm certainly still angry about the fact that Bill Clinton was on record telling her campaign to go with a Rust Belt strategy and not a 50-state strategy or whatever it was that they did. And they didn't listen to him. He knew that Donald Trump was going to win the Rust Belt. Michael Moore also knew. He went on Bill Maher a few months before the election, and he said, "I'm sorry, you guys, I hate to tell you this, Donald Trump is going to win." And they booed him and laughed. And I was watching that, and I at first was one of the people who laughed, and then I was like, you know what? He knows. This is his home territory. He's from Michigan. And if Michael Moore, as wildly progressive and liberal as he is, if he's telling us on a progressive show on Bill Maher that Donald Trump is going to win, he has a real good shot of winning. And that is exactly what happened. And Democrats didn't listen. We didn't listen. We didn't listen, and it still makes me angry. And we're not talking about, like, you know, we could talk to death about how Hillary Clinton would have been evil and blah, 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 whatever. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about someone beating Donald Trump. That's all. And we could have done it. We could have beat Donald Trump, and we fucking blew it. We blew it. We blew it. And I think the main reason we blew it is because we didn't listen. We didn't listen. We were way overconfident. I include myself in that camp. I was way overconfident. I said, regardless of the polling, I think we got a 3 out of 4 shot at Hillary Clinton winning, which is pretty confident. Like 75% chance that we'll win, pretty confident. That morning I woke up on the election, I was like, I bet we're going to be celebrating tonight. This is going to be great. I'm really excited for it. And sure enough, that was one of the worst nights of my life, because not only was I wrong, I was angry. I was really, really angry for being so wrong and not listening much, much, much sooner. So again, make no mistake, I'm not going to defend the Democratic Party as this bastion of political balance and efficacy, because clearly it's not. And I'm not going to say that everything that happened in the Senate, in the Kavanaugh hearings, was beneficial for the Democrats, because I don't think it was. Whether we agree with the accuser or not, it doesn't matter. But part of the game that Democrats are not really good at playing is, unfortunately, playing to the middle. And that's really what wins elections, is playing to the middle. And I'm not saying that that's what I would do. I'm not saying that that's the way that I think it should be. That's just the fact. That's the fact. And that's what Bernie Sanders did really well. And by the way, let's not forget, that's what Barack Obama did really well. His landslide victory in 2008 is a clear testament to that.
Yeah, I was performing security for it. I don't need to hear any more about it. It was so packed. It was crazy.
Crazy. And he won. I mean, just look at the electoral vote. He won in a landslide in 2008. Landslide. And that's because he had a message of unity and he talked to the middle. He brought in the middle as a black man with a black wife and 2 black daughters. He did it very, 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 very well. And the Democrats got overconfident after that. We thought, oh, yeah, great. We're making progress. Let's get a woman in there. Let's focus on minorities. Let's talk about minorities and vulnerable communities. Let's do all of that. Unfortunately, it's not time for that yet. And this is what I talk about when I tell people, listen, in order to protect vulnerable communities, we have to win elections first. And if we're not playing to the middle and playing to the broadest set of the population, we're not going to win elections, and therefore we're not going to have power to protect people and to make change. And a lot of Democrats don't want to hear that because they say, oh, I don't want milquetoast anymore. I don't want boring. I don't want neoliberals. I don't want this. I don't want that. And I'm like, all right, well, progress is incremental. And that's another thing that I think a lot of people fail to realize. None of this is going to change overnight. It's all going to be incremental, and we have to be willing to play the long game. And I think that another failing of the Democrats is this mistaken belief that we can transform everything overnight or in one election. And that if we don't, that we just have to stop. But that, of course, is bullshit. And that's why, despite being disheartened by the 2016 election, obviously, as I just ranted and raved about, that we have a lot of work to do. And I think that we have a chance at taking back the White House in 2020, but it's a huge uphill battle, and I think it's more likely that the president will be reelected.
Well, good. I'm glad you think he'll be reelected, because I think he will be too. I don't think it's even going to be close. But you made good points there, and I think maybe I had fallen down the same path, whereas I had a belief that there was a wave right around Bernie of just, I guess, social progress, possibility, belief. And I really thought that was real. I thought we could have made dramatic changes that weren't pragmatic. And everybody was saying, oh, you can't do that. You got to be pragmatic. Well, yeah, 2 years later, I'll step back and say, yeah, I was wrong. Yeah, got to be pragmatic, it seems. So, yeah, I mean, there's certain legitimacy to that. What I was hoping we could do real quick is go over these last questions, because we already have 2 hours worth of podcast to give some people. We already have 2 hour-long episodes. And then, yeah, if you want to go and dig into some of these issues later, we can, but I bet we'll have new ones that come up that you find before then. So let's go into the shooting at Thousand Oaks, California. And, this is, again, another incident of something that's entirely predictable, that is going to continue to repeat at the same rate that it's repeating at, and will continue to go to, because we don't do shit all about it. So your first question was, is the mental health excuse valid or overused? Well, for one, I don't know. I didn't see any evidence that this guy was actually a mental health issue, but I think it's not a valid excuse, and I think it's highly overused and misses the point entirely. It is my belief that all violence is a biological malfunction, and any person can have that biological malfunction at any point in time, and that there is no mental health or body. There's no mind-body separation. There's no such thing as a mental illness. The body works as a whole thing. Its chemicals flow throughout the whole thing. If your adrenaline gland suddenly has a freak out, then that's in your body, and then that adrenaline goes to your brain, and you will act a different way, and people will call that a mental issue, and it's not a fucking mental issue. Your body's one thing. So my thing is apes with death sticks. That's the whole thing. I don't care that a gun is an inanimate object. The whole purpose is not, we're not talking about guns sitting there inanimmately. We're talking about people with guns, apes with death sticks, and apes with death sticks will act like apes with death sticks. Now, we can't stop the apes from being the apes. That's a silly idea. So we have to stop the apes from having death sticks. It's fucking, I mean, I don't understand. And again, so I was on Joe Rogan and a bunch of other things where people said they were going to give me these gun debates. Colin Noir went on there saying he was going to do a gun debate. Joe's friend was supposed to do a gun debate with me. None of these dudes are going to do gun debates with me. I think if they hear just a couple of those simple points, that they have to give in to the idea that their belief that guns make the world better just is fucking completely unevidenced.
Agree. I totally agree. Yeah, the challenge that I have, so I think I really appreciate your perspective here, because you obviously are intimately more familiar with this from a law enforcement perspective, and also military. You have a military background,
Well,
is that right?
yeah, but I didn't understand this. So I was very good with a weapon, and I kind of thought things were about professionalism until I was probably midway through my master's before I started getting this. And I was not until I was well into a PhD before I started understanding and seeing that violence and things like that weren't what we were calling them. I mean, rational
Right.
choice theory to crime is completely disproven. Like there is violence is not a deterrent. The police are the fourth strongest cause of violence that we know, and there's only four causes that I can find in the sciences, and the police are the number four because they are violence as the solution to violence. All violence as a deterrent is completely ineffective. So the whole where I got to, like, sure, I'm experienced in being the hammer, but what's weird is that I was a hammer that went to school, and that's
Right.
really what made me rethink things more than anything is school. But I don't
Right.
think that people that don't have the experience are likely to draw the connections.
Right. Okay. So with this shooting in Thousand Oaks, I mean, and this is sort of a general conversation that we could have about many shootings that have happened over the past, let's say, 10 years, but this one happened this week. So he did have, I think, a PTSD diagnosis.
Yeah, I just don't even know what that means either, you know?
Yeah, well. Regardless of that, there was at least one psychiatrist who determined, based on the DSM,
Sure.
that he had PTSD. So I fine.
Do you know what it was?
He had PTSD.
Do you know what it was from, though? I just don't know.
It was from
Okay.
combat. He was
Okay.
in combat. Yeah. So and that's accepted. I mean, so my question, I guess, and this is something that I have raised a number of times after many shootings. The rhetoric that I often see is advocating for mental health services above all else. And I think you agree, because you just said earlier, I think it's such a fucking cop-out, because what it assumes is that only mentally ill people will blow away a school or a bar or whatever, and that mental illness is a prerequisite for any of these mass assaults or mass murders or mass shootings. And I think that is a way for the NRA set to deflect responsibility from actual gun reform, because, like you said, yes, humans kill people kill people, but the gun really helps, like, a lot. It makes it real easy to kill a lot of people at once, and that's not what we're addressing. And it's interesting, because I think that my position there is a little bit at odds with the fact that I do believe that we don't have enough of a conversation about mental health broadly. I'm not talking about violence. I'm just saying mental health broadly. Now, as we move into a more modern society and learn more about medicine, about the human mind, we are also learning that there's a lot of shit that can go wrong. And certainly 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago, we either had different explanations that we now know are wrong, or we ignored things and people suffered. Well, now we're trying not to do that. And I do believe that there isn't enough of a mental health conversation. There's a lot of stigma around mental health issues, particularly for veterans. And I think that when we blame mental health for these kinds of shootings, it is a way to avoid the elephant in the room, which is that we're not addressing gun reform. And how do we do that? How do we change the conversation when we're also dealing with the lobby of the NRA? When we've had common sense gun reforms that had been proposed in Congress, the Manchin-Toomey Amendment, which failed in Congress despite having 92% support from the American population. This is, universal background checks, I think, assault weapons, pretty simple stuff, not taking anybody's guns away. And we're not doing that. And I also don't have a lot of confidence that that's going to happen anytime soon, because, again, this is a constitutional issue. And I think that the constitutionalists and the fundamentalists and the conservatives, and certainly the gun people, hold very tightly to the Second Amendment and say, well, it's right there in the Constitution, it's my right. Well, yes, it is. Number one, I think the Constitution needs a page one rewrite. But even if that were not the case, let's just talk about the Second Amendment. It was very different. Times were very different. Gun technology was very different when it was written in 1787. So that's the conversation we're not having. And can it be about mental health too? Yes. But until we address how people have access to guns legally and illegally, because his gun was legal, it was legally registered to him, but then he had something, he had like a mag that was illegal or something, I don't know. How do we do this? And how do we do this with a deeply, deeply polarized political climate where we have two sides that absolutely cannot agree on how to approach this issue, and in the meantime, a lot of people are dying and suffering.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I've had a lot of conversations that are safety around gun, and would be the biggest area where I would be most adamantly against the Republican Party. But I would be probably just as much against the Democratic Party when it comes to this, because they missed the ball game playing this power, or I think they're obsessed with being the oppressors and saying, no, you will not have your gun, when there are so many other ways to incentivize and disincentivize this to a way that's more beneficial. For one, the thing is the assault weapons ban. It's kind of retarded. Yeah, I'm not supposed to use the retarded word anymore, but I'm so tired of playing the word games. It's completely retarded to go after the assault weapons. There's such a small percentage of the things going wrong. By far, your issue is handguns, by a mile. So you'd have to focus on handguns first to give a damn. The second issue is for one, there's no reason to change the Constitution for this. That way is extremely difficult, and is obviously going to get a lot of pushback. So you can do certain things, like it's often treated as a joke because Chris Rock said it, but literally it doesn't say anything about ammunition. For one, and the second issue is, my argument is to stop the manufacturing of weapons, handguns, and assault. Anything that's not bolt action. So I think you should be able to have as many shotguns as you want to protect your home, because that's where the Constitution got messed up. Do you have a right to self-defense? Yes. And the best weapon for self-defense is a shotgun. I mean, I guess that's subjective because I'm saying best, but I would just love to hear somebody that's remotely familiar with guns try to dispute that. So do you have a right to hunt animals? I think so, without a doubt. But if you're a good hunter, a bolt-action rifle is perfectly sufficient. And if you can't hunt with a bolt-action rifle, you shouldn't be calling yourself a hunter. So those two things are settled. I would think that if we were to restructure the Constitution, it would be that you would have those rights clearly guaranteed, and the other ones obviously overturned when it comes to handguns, concealable weapons, things like that. Because if your idea is to face the government, you don't need concealed weapons. So with all of those, I'm completely fine. But I think we should stop manufacturing. It's the easiest way. There's no rules against manufacturing. And so what this does is this changes the incentive. So my degrees are not in criminal justice. My bachelor's is, but my work is all in business management. And so I've tried to make all of those principles carry over. And the way you incentivize and disincentivize human beings is the same no matter where you go. So the supply and demand is pretty easy on this. If you cut the supply, well then the guns stick around for a very long time, so it's not any quick fix. But what happens is those guns become more valuable because their supply is dropped. So a handgun on the street right now that's a piece of junk is like maybe $100, $200. But if that thing becomes that they won't make any of those anymore again, well, suddenly people with a lot of money and stuff want them, and they just want to collect them, and they want to have them up there as a museum piece, and they become much more valuable. So the less of them we have, the more they become valuable as an investment piece versus a weapon you would actually use on the street to settle an issue.
Well, I have never thought of that. That is very enlightening, Michael, because I think that makes perfect sense. Somehow limiting manufacturing is a great place to start, do you think that there is a pathway to federally limiting gun manufacturing within the next, let's say, 50 years? And what
50?
Would that be?
I think so, absolutely. I certainly, and just, I know you're disagreeing with me, but I would not be surprised to see something like that happen towards the end of Trump's second term. I think towards the end of the first term, you're going to see something where he does something about cannabis, and that's because
just to be clear, I will not disagree with you that Trump might be reelected. I will be surprised if he's not reelected. I don't want him to be. But you're suggesting that you think the Trump administration will propose limitations on gun manufacturing at the end of his second term?
I don't know why you couldn't use an executive order to do that. Maybe you can't, but I mean, the way the executive orders are now, they're pretty much fiats. So I would imagine he could do it that way, or he could just use his podium to kind of say that at the end. I think he wants to go down. People get upset because they think he's a populist and he wants to just do whatever people want. But you made an argument for democracy. But that's populism. Mm-hmm. And if he wants to appeal to the populace like that, then I think he will end up doing good things. And I think he wants to go down as being someone that bucked the system, as somebody that was truly for the people. He's essentially a class traitor. And I think a couple of big things that can go down. For one, if he accomplishes North Korea, that's going to be one belt. He's going to get a peace prize for that if that's over. So if he has a peace prize under his belt, and cannabis legalization, I think cannabis legalization comes because that's a shoo-in to a second term. And if he were to do that, he's going to get 30% of the black population. Gets 30% of the black population, chalk it up. You don't have a chance. So I think he'll do something like that. And then to go down in history, you wouldn't have to. You could put something like that as a possibility. So one thing that is tough for people, especially Americans, to accept is, and I find it humorous when they're calling Trump a dictator, because throughout history, the only way a bad government has ever had power returned to the people is through a benevolent dictator. So if he is the dictator and he's benevolent, it's exactly what you want.
I think the disagreement would arise in whether or not he's benevolent.
Sure.
I think that
without question.
I think that he has indicated a lot. He and his family have indicated they are interested in their own personal gain through the office of the White House. But to your earlier point, I think the challenge with limiting. So, for example, let's say in this hypothetical world where the Trump administration proposes an executive order, they issue an executive order limiting gun manufacturing, that would, of course, result in lawsuits from the NRA and from the gun manufacturers themselves. It would most certainly elevate to the Supreme Court. And then we have a conservative Supreme Court that is. I
wish you'd frame it differently. You have a constitutionalist Supreme Court.
Okay, well, let's not even say what kind of Supreme Court it is. Just a Supreme Court. You have a Supreme Court that is deciding if an executive order that limits gun manufacturing and domestic gun manufacturing is constitutional, because ultimately that's what the Supreme Court's job is to decide constitutionality. And how is it possible that any Supreme Court could decide that it was constitutional to limit the domestic manufacturing of something that is indirectly guaranteed? I just mean right to bear arms, not necessarily right to bear domestic arms, but just right to bear arms. That is guaranteed by the Constitution. I don't know if that's going to be the pathway to limit domestic manufacturing. Certainly, that would be great, but also consider that in your scenario of Trump proposing federal legalization of marijuana and also a limitation on gun manufacturing, certainly he'll pick up a bunch of supporters, like you offered it as an example, the black vote if he were to legalize marijuana. But think about who he'll lose. Or will he lose anyone? Will he lose people? I mean, I'm thinking of evangelical Christians. I'm thinking of fundamentalists. I'm thinking of really hard right conservatives that think that marijuana is like a demonic evil drug. So I think it's a trade-off there, because I don't think he would just get he would net additional supporters. I think he'd be losing some as well. Do I think it's possible that he could do something like that? Yeah, maybe. I think that he's a little bit too beholden to the Republican Party to do that, certainly right now. But if he was reelected, who knows?
Yeah, I think you would have the Supreme Court battle that way, but I still think it won't hold up. We've banned other manufacturing things when they've been deemed harmful. So I think another big thing, if a party could do it, would be to overturn the CDC's ban on treating guns as a public health issue, which obviously they are. So maybe more data allows you to win the argument more by allowing the CDC to investigate it. But I think at some point in time, within 50 years, something has to break. So one thing that I have said, though, is if you end the drug war, we may be having a different conversation on guns. It sounds bad, but if the mass shootings were all we had, it really wouldn't be a big deal from a statistical standpoint from somebody like me that comes from that perspective. So
So you're saying that if we were not focusing resources on a drug war and instead drugs were regulated and legal, that we would be able to devote more resources to addressing the gun issue?
I think you would devote a lot more sources. You would be stopping the bleeding that is causing the triggering of the biological events of violence. So the drug war is a major contributor to, there are 3 causes of violence. This is my research, this is my hypothesis, nowhere else where you find even any causes to go. This is the work that I do. So the first one, the biggest issue is environmental poisoning, most prominently led by lead poisoning. So you have people that are lead poisoned who end up with a gun, and then they have the violent, they're more prone to the biological malfunction. And then so you have that. So the drug war is definitely a part of these neighborhoods not having their environmental concerns addressed, because we have resources devoted to that. So we would have resources freed up to fight lead poisoning like New York City did. New York City fought lead poisoning better than any city in the nation, and they have the lowest crime rate of any city in the nation. It's absolutely no surprise. The second thing is the local instabilities, or this second strongest is actually income inequality. So it's the not having the middle class. So you see places like Chicago and Baltimore having this contribute higher because there's very little middle class there, and you just have the very rich standing right in front of the very poor, and that obviously has some kind of an animosity. Poverty is not correlated to violence. That's a misnomer at all. Like, there's plenty of entirely poor communities that commit no violence. The third thing is local instability. So you're talking about not having infrastructure in a city, not having access to water, your father being in prison, a fatherless home, different things like that that can compound on somebody. And then the fourth thing is the actual police themselves. So those are the 4 things that cause violence. And if you're not fighting those 4 things, you're not fighting violence. Obviously nowhere in this country is any government fighting those 4 things that actually cause violence. So if we stop the things that cause violence, the guns actually wouldn't be an issue. So if you get to there is a certain point where the apes with death sticks do become more acceptable if the apes are better. So I think it's more realistic to go after the death sticks, but there are some changes that I think could really change my paradigm and my argument dramatically.
Yeah, I agree. I saw a great tweet, I think it was, if your child hits another child with a stick, do you give everybody...
I never thought of that.
Do you give everybody sticks? Do you give a stick to the teacher, or take away the stick? And
it's so obvious, right?
it's so obvious, and we are not the same as Australia, and I'm not saying we're the same as Australia, but the program in Australia to buy back weapons and the resultant decrease in violent crime is an analog. I think that's something that we should be really looking at, despite the political differences between our countries. I think it does make sense for us to consider that. Do I think that we should take away everyone's guns as a first step? No, absolutely not. It would not work.
But the day, they just convinced people. There was no force.
Right, exactly right. I think that your perspective, which had never occurred to me, that I think is brilliant, is to start with manufacturing and address it that way over time. I think that's very, very smart. I think that's something that certainly is achievable within the next 50 years. You know, I'll be in my 80s at that point, and I could see that happening.
Progress.
Yeah, and I think slow progress is okay. I mean, that's another thing that I get a lot of flack for from my progressive friends, is they say, okay, well, you know, we can't keep doing it the way that it is. We can't, the status quo isn't working, blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm talking about the status quo, but I think incremental progress is better than no progress at all. And I think people across the political spectrum would feel that way, whatever progress they feel for their particular ideals. Making incremental progress is better than doing nothing. So I think that's also the conversation around guns, is that nobody wants to make incremental progress, certainly not the NRA. So we don't have these kinds of conversations about how we can do small things to address the scourge of guns in this country. And then when the Manchin Toomey amendment was proposed and died in Congress, that was a small incremental step, but it didn't fucking pass because we lost the Senate in 2014 and all that. So I think whatever it is, the next step, however long it takes, it's going to be a small one. But I do think that in time, that through the awakening and enlightenment of this country, which is still pretty young, I do think that something like what happened in Australia could happen maybe within the next 100 years, maybe sooner, because the youngest generation right now is really sick of it, because these are the kids that are, I don't know if this has happened at your daughter's school, but where they do the drills, where they have to, where if there's an intruder, I mean, I remember doing it. I was in high school from 1998 to 2002. This was around the era of Columbine in Colorado. And towards the end of my time in high school, I graduated in 2002, we were doing the intruder drills, and there was a special tone, and we had to go up against the wall in the classroom, and it was a whole protocol. And this was horrifying to us in 2001, 2002. And this has just happened more and more and more, and permeated more and more and more and more and more schools. And these kids are fucking sick of it. They think it's crazy. They also know that it's not normal. They know that it's not like being at war and getting under your desk in case there's a bombing. Well, war is war. This is like not a war. I mean, it's a kind of war, but it's not an organized political war. Yeah, this is self-inflicted. And there just isn't, you know, I will say, I have to give the Democrats credit. And I do also have to say, you are free to disagree with this, but the first American politician on the international stage to say live on television, we need to stand up against the gun lobby and we need to stand up against the NRA, was Hillary Clinton in 2016. And I do think that that kind of attitude needs to be adopted more by Democrats, which will not do any favors for bringing gun supporters to their side. But I think that there are enough people like you and I that want common sense gun reform who are maybe more moderate that would be inspired by that. And that's a message that I'm not hearing from the left, because they're scared that it will be isolating and will scare off the NRA people. But I guess I don't really have data to point to this, but I don't think that that is enough of a population or certainly a voting bloc, that if the Democrats were more aggressive about gun control, I think it would do a lot more to help the message of the party by saying, no, fuck that. We don't care if you're afraid that we're going to take away your guns. We're not going to take away your fucking guns, but we don't want you to get fucking blown away by someone, or your kids to get blown away in school. So we're going to take some steps to make sure that your kids don't get fucking blown away. And that I'm not seeing. But we did see it when, again, I'm going back to this the third time, pardon me for being a broken record, the Manchin-Toomey Amendment, which was universal background checks and all that, but of course it died in Congress. So it's certainly it is as with many things for the Democrats, it is an opportunity for some really clear messaging, and I hope that the Democrats don't blow it again. And I did appreciate that Hillary Clinton was very candid about it in 2016 when she said that, and it was very inspiring to a lot of people. Now, not enough, as we know, because she didn't win, but that is a message that I think she was right about, and I do think we need more of that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't argue with that. Probably just as long as we can make that conversation actually constructive. And just for the record, I pulled up for your next question, you were saying about our gun ownership and how the saturation is an issue. So why does the United States have more guns and therefore more shootings per capita than any other developed nation? So yeah, we do have more guns than any other nation by quite a while. Just so people know, it is the United States, Serbia, Yemen, Cyprus, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Uruguay, and we don't get to civilization now again until Norway, essentially. So at 8, and it seems easy to say it's our gun saturation, and I think the access to it is more the issue than the actual saturation, to be technical on the terms. But I think it's because of those 4 reasons. Fundamentally, people are correct that the more guns does not lead to the more shootings, but the more violence events that occurs and have access to the guns make it easier and more dramatic. And in this country, we are not doing any things of those 4 issues that I said cause the crime. So in these other areas where you have things like Norway, who has about a third as many guns as we do, which is still a lot, they are in an environment where they're not lead poisoned, they're not environmentally poisoned, they are an incredibly unified nation that is very homogenistic, that's the word I'm looking for. And if you have those things, it seems very clear that you won't have these crazy problems. Now, can you have somebody go crazy and kill a whole bunch of people at once if they have that access? Yeah. But the actual number of the times the shootings occur is the shooting is an event of violence, and that is a direct correlation to our country being so bad at combating or even attempt to address the issues that cause crime. Think about this. Most cities' biggest line budget item is their police department, and they're using that entire line budget item to do things that we know increase crime. And that's it. They don't do a single thing that we know decreases crime, which would be fighting those 4 causes. So even a police department being a cause of violence, its end goal should be abolishment. But it continues to try and grow because what it's doing is not working that dramatically. So I think there is more wrapped up in the ignorance of our criminal justice approach to why we have guns than there is in our gun approach, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And certainly a country like, what did you say was Norway? They have a very high human development index. They have very low unemployment. And their country is structured very differently than the United States. It is more homogenous, as you noted. So we can't really make a direct comparison and say, well, let's just be like Norway. But you're certainly right that there are.
But they fight the 4 things. So they don't have lead poisoning because they never brought it in.
Yeah.
They have a local stability because they addressed all those issues. They have fathers in their homes. They have a middle class, and they do everything they can to keep police off the street.
Right, exactly right. And so yes, my point there are socio-political factors that contribute to a country like Norway having access to guns but not using them in the same way, and not using them for violent crime in the same way. And that's something that is clearly, conspicuously, painfully absent from the United States, which is why we have such a problem that no one seems to be able to address on the one hand, and then also that nobody seems to be able to want to address. Being unable to address and not wanting to address are two different things, and we have the problem with both. And it is confounding, and it's very sad because I'm sure you, as I am, are very sick of seeing conservative politicians in particular offer their thoughts and prayers after yet another shooting, which is what they always say. And I do see more messaging from the left that is specifically about gun reform. You don't see that on the right, and I
Sure.
do think that is because the Democrats have an opportunity there, like I said before, to message gun violence more specifically and eloquently, and package that as part of their platform rather than being afraid of it, because I think they are very afraid of it. Oh, Obama's going to take away our guns. The black guy is going to take away our guns, which of course is ridiculous when gun sales went up during his presidency because people thought that they were going to be taken away, so they had to buy them. So I do hope that the Democrats seize on that opportunity in 2020, because we know there are going to be dozens more shootings between now and 2020. It's not going to get better. And I do think also, it's funny because I haven't brought this up, but I think this is related to so many of the issues we've talked about today, is that when this generation, the oldest generation of leaders, so I'm talking about people like the baby boomer generation that is essentially running the show now in Washington, in our state houses, in most areas of American politics. It's people generally age 50 and up that are running the show. In particular, when people like the 70 and 80-year-olds who are running the show now, when they die, that's really going to change the tenor of the American political landscape. When you see people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York, she's 29. We're going to see more of that, whether you like it or not. We're going to see more young people that get into politics, more young people that say, fuck this, I don't want these old people running the show, on the left and the right. This is on all sides. We're going to see more young people. And I do think that will create more fertile ground for the kind of change that you're talking about, such as limiting, if it doesn't happen during the Trump administration and instead it takes decades, I do think it's going to be younger politicians that are going to make it happen because they have grown up with this. And I think that's also a win that we talked about earlier for the Democrats with the midterms on Tuesday, because I do think that the electorate feels that the representatives that they're sending to the House in January are more reflective of their own values and their own experience, whether it's Somalians in Minnesota or Native Americans in Arizona, I think it was. So that, I think, is progress, and I think that there's a balance where you can talk about representation rather than difference, and it's not about othering and saying we're all different and that's okay. It's instead about saying we represent our representatives really represent us, and that inspires us, and that makes us feel more politically engaged and more have more political agency. And I think that's good for all groups: white, black, Asian, young, old, gay, straight. Any group is going to be more politically engaged and more politically active if they feel like they have an actual representative. And I think that we made an incremental step towards that on Tuesday.
Yeah, I certainly can't argue with that either. I used to say it more often, but I can't help but to empathize and agree with your statements about these damn baby boomers. I used to always just be like, God, would you just get out of my way? Like, why are you still in that position? You're 80, retire, go home.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Mitch McConnell.
This has been great. Let's save our Constitution argument for the next time. That way we can be a little bit more prepared. There was something you told me I was wrong about that I researched and I was wrong about, but I didn't point it out on here. I actually had this on YouTube streaming, so I put it on the chat just so people would know. Not a lot of chat, but anyway. God, what did you say? I want to just address it here before I forget. We said something about the it was the three the three presidents who had somebody appointed in their last term. So there was three that had somebody in their last year. It was Lyndon Johnson was the last one, and two of the three did go in. So historically, you would
there was precedent
there's
for that.
certainly precedent, but what I think gets left out and is there were so many opportunities for people to do it, but they didn't because they let it move on to the next one. But you're right, the ones that it came up with and they actually submitted somebody, it was two or three did get through. One of the third they decided to just push it on to the next, but there was some kind of like extenuating circumstances to that.
Right. Well, good. Now we know.
So again, you win that point. So I just wanted to make sure we pointed that out.
Thank you. Yeah, this is great. Thank you, Michael. I think it's really important for these kinds of conversations to happen. I think there's a lot of overlap in our beliefs and our positions. I think there's also a lot of things that we strongly disagree about. I think that's okay. I think it's about finding that common ground. And I'm always happy to talk to. I'd love to talk to you again. I'd love to talk to other people and figure out how we can solve a lot of the problems that are facing our nation today on not only the local level but nationally, because certainly what the past couple of years have taught us is that people are really beginning to the electorate is really beginning to understand the consequences of elections, and that's something that people have been pretty apathetic about for a while, and I certainly appreciate the moving away from apathy and people becoming more engaged. And I know we agree that a lot of people who vote are stupid, but when you get more people overall voting, you get some smart people in there too. So that's why I just want an overall increase in participation. I think that will end up setting us up for moving towards a more perfect union and evolving in a way that considers the desires and the visions for prosperity that include the widest number of Americans.
Yeah, I agree with that philosophy. I'm definitely concerned about with the seas that lift all boats and as much as possible, and equally as much as possible. So but I think it says a lot about you and your character to come on here and talk to me. It's definitely more rare on the left to have somebody come and argue with the left, because I am the left. I am just a very self-critical wing of the left that cares about my policies getting through and not who does it. So I'm going to challenge everyone that is willing to face it, and there aren't a lot of people willing to face it. And the idea that you're willing to engage with me and try to bust our bubbles, and I think you're helping me bust some of mine. There's definitely probably 5 points here or so you've made that have kind of pulled me back in and kind of helped me be reorientated from my aggressiveness towards the Democratic Party, from where I think really let us down, and my side that is definitely doesn't have the problems with President Trump that a lot of people do, because I think that's because I'm so obsessed with policy, and I just think this dude can be convinced to do the right policy, and I think he's a hell of a lot smarter than people give him credit for. And I think that bullshit sixth grade language is what got him elected. The American reading average is sixth grade level, and when people say he's communicating poorly, I like to point out he's communicating poorly to you. He is communicating very effectively towards a lot of other people. And if we could express enough humility and empathy to understand those perspectives, I think we'll have some clues to that unity you were talking about.
Yes. Good. That's a great note to end. Thank you,
all right, brother.
Michael.
It was wonderful talking to you. I can't wait to do it again, and I'll put all this up and send it to you as soon as I can.
Like most cops, the emotions felt when pinning the badge on my uniform for the first time was a source of immense pride, but also a shocking reality to the complication of performing a duty under the weight of such power and responsibility. The callousness of veterans cops and the braggadocious masculinity of the streets are immature expressions of the generations of trauma enacted on our brothers and sisters from a system oppressing us all. My internal fights with policing, whistleblowing, scholarly endeavors, reform efforts, and politics have failed in exhausting fashion.
And what I'm trying to say is that we are looking at people who are doing nothing new, and if we focus on the actions, then we can fix the things for next time, because when you focus on people, we end up thinking we can chop their head off, they put a new person in and something will change. But if we don't focus on the methodologies and the institutions, then we will be totally missing
somebody, put them in a prison cell, do the paperwork, go back out, and do it again. So what we really need is to change the incentives and disincentives so that no matter what the role, we're still going towards that objective that actually serves you.
More occupation, more vehicles, if your answer continues to be violent, because we have to understand that everything about policing is inherently violent. I have come in there with authority and told you what you will do.
I believe one of the reasons behind my struggles is that I had not laid out a consistent and intertwined philosophy of what in the hell I was trying to say. For the philosophical foundations of crime and punishment to be ushered into the 21st century, a reimagination of our institutions is necessary. Building off the famous works of Cesar Beccaria, I construct those pathways to the Enlightenment period of justice. Free will, sanctuary cities, gun control, eyewitness testimony, incarceration, and more must all work together for a prosperous society. Learning these lessons has been a brutal journey for me, and it is unlikely to be an easy one for you, but it is one that we owe to the future, to make a safer world for our children to enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Crimes and Punishments in the 21st Century by yours truly, Michael Wood, is most conveniently ordered from the evil empire Amazon, because we are in that 21st century after all. For the enhanced and expanded audiobook, check out Audible. In the meantime, the philosophical half of Crime and Punishments, all 40-some chapters and then some, is being presented as a free podcast from iMember Media at imembermedia.com and will be available on all major platforms and direct from the publisher. Pause the video or see the links in the notes and prepare for the challenge and adventure of self-critical thought.
Dry day on Wednesday with sunny periods. However, there may be more cloud in the southeast where it will be breezier. After a chilly start, it will be mostly dry on Thursday with some sunny spells. However, it may be rather cloudy in the southeast. Patchy rain will arrive in the north. mostly dry on Thursday with some sunny spells. However, it may be rather cloudy in the southeast. Patchy rain will arrive in the north.